So I'm just going to go through some of the questions that I received. Some of them came through the intake form, which you saw. Some of them people sent to me privately and stuff like that, and that's fine too. Um, I always want people to feel like they can ask any question and not worry about it being tied to their identity. Because I know with career coaching, one of the things that I've learned, and I've been doing this for a little over 6 years now, is that people want help and they have questions and concerns about their boss or about their company, their colleagues. They don't necessarily want the world knowing that. It's an interesting issue of trying to understand what people need and the questions they have without seeing that stuff publicly on social media and LinkedIn and so forth, because people really don't want that out there. And so I offer these opportunities to ask a question anonymously and not have it tied to your identity. I'm not going to have any identifying information, like who asked the question. If there was any information that kind of gave a clue, I'm going to strip that out. If there's anything about a company, I take that out, and I'll say a whole lot of company ABC and things like that. So I'm very careful about that. I've been doing this for a while. I don't want anybody to feel like their information's been outed and their boss is like, "You're unhappy? You're not happy with your job anymore?" I don't want anybody to know that. So a really good question that came up, and I get asked this a lot, and I talk about this a lot, was what can I do to stand out amongst hundreds of other applicants? That's the $1 million question. And it's a huge question. It's been coming up a lot lately. If you haven't been tracking the numbers, in tech alone, the tech industry alone, 300,000 people have been laid off in the last year. That's a whole lot of competition in the job market. So anybody who's been thinking about switching jobs or is looking for a job, and especially in tech, you now have 300,000 people competing for jobs too. And that's just tech. So we know that there have been several million people in the US alone who've left their job or lost their job and are now looking to get reemployed and looking for a job. So it's a huge problem. And it's one that I talk about because unless you have a dream resume, like you are just a dream person on paper, right? You went to some Ivy League school and you worked at some top company and you were just, everything on paper is just the dream candidate. It is hard to stand out. And even if you were the dream candidate, if your resume is in a stack of 1,000 resumes, still hard to stand out. And that is the case definitely with some of the larger companies. Google gets thousands and thousands of resumes every day, probably more than that. It's insane. So that's why I always encourage people. There's a few things. One is I talk about becoming an opportunity magnet, and that's a phrase that I use a lot because it changes everything. It changes everything. When you are an opportunity magnet, instead of you looking for jobs and hunting and searching and all that and applying and all that stuff that you're doing, people come looking for you. So when people know who you are and what you do and that you're great at what you do, you become a magnet for new opportunities. And this does happen. I've had it happen in my career. I've had it happen with people that I know and people that I've coached where they said, I'm getting inbound calls every day, multiple calls from recruiters and hiring managers and stuff like that. And so to do that, you have to be highly visible. I mean, it's hard to attract an opportunity and to stand out if no one knows you exist. And it's really, I talk a lot about treating your career like a business, and what do businesses do? They market their products, they advertise. You know, they really want to let you know that you're an option, that they're an option for you. So you have to be highly visible, and that can be on social media, it can be on LinkedIn, it can be in person at events and things like that, and with the right people. So it's not enough to kind of be active on Facebook and doing things with your friends if they're not the people who are going to be making decisions to hire you or to work with you. And so you want to make sure you're being highly visible with the right people in the right place. And if you're trying to get attention to get hired, Twitter, LinkedIn are good places to be visible. I talk about intelligent networking, which is not the usual schmoozing at cocktail parties, but it's connecting with people more deeply. And it's connecting with people in a meaningful way and building relationships. And the whole goal of all this is to find what I call the inside champion. So if you have an inside champion, which is somebody within a company that loves what you do, they know you, they love the work you do, they know that you're a high quality person, they're going to do everything they can to get you through the front door and to put your resume in the right hand of the right hiring manager. So if you have this inside champion, that can be coming from a company that you don't even know about, they're just a big fan of yours, or you can deliberately target a company and say, I have people in this company that if I can somehow get past all those screeners and all those things that are making my resume end up in a different bucket, I'll have a shot. And that happens all the time. It used to happen when I was a leader. People would actually hand me a resume and say, hey, would you take a look at my friend's resume? I think they'd be a good fit for this role. It happened for me. I had people put my resume in someone's hand, and it makes such a difference. If I look back on my 20-year career, not a single one of my jobs came through a traditional process in 20 years. Not one. Everything came through my network, not my resume, not a job application. My job at IBM, it happened because of my advisor. He knew somebody that worked at IBM that was an ex-student of his. My job at Apple happened because another graduate student did an internship and connected me with the hiring manager. My job at eBay, the guy who hired me went to school with me. So it's pretty easy for me to have an inside champion there. Yahoo, the person who hired me used to be my boss's boss at Apple. Every single opportunity was through my network. And in some cases, they reached out to me. I wasn't looking for a job. They reached out to me and said, hey, would you at least give us consideration? So that is one of the biggest things you can do to stand out is network. The best thing to do to stand out is not being the pile of people that are all trying to stand out. Having your resume in that pile is not going to help you stand out. There's nothing you can say on a resume that someone hasn't tried. People have done skywriting to get jobs. People have rented billboards to get jobs. People have showed up with flowers at the office in a tuxedo to get a job. I mean, people do crazy stuff. So there's nothing you can really do. The best thing you can do is network and connect with people. Anybody who's worked with me knows I'm a huge fan of that. So the next question that came in was very specific about someone sent me their resume. So they said, here's my resume, take a quick look. Does it need modified? So I'm going to be much more general with this advice because I don't want you to have to listen to me modify a specific person's resume. But the thing that I saw in the resume is something that often happens with people writing resumes. One is it is way too verbose. And so people will write resumes using full sentence structures and grammar and all that stuff. That's not what resumes are. Resumes use something I call telegraphic speech, which is get rid of all the extraneous fluff, all the words that don't matter. It doesn't have to be grammatically correct. I mean, you have to spell check and make sure that that's all right. But it's very brief and to the point, just like the old telegraphs in the old days, right? They didn't put a whole bunch of extra words in there because they were going dot, 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 dot. And so the telegraphic speech is super important, which means get it down to shorter scannable information, fewer bullets, because it's most likely being put through a scanner. It's most likely being scanned for keywords and information and then being able to be harvested so that the people who are looking at this information have an easier way to do that. I also talk about you've got to tune your resume for each job application, for each opportunity. There is no perfect one resume. There's no way. The only thing that kind of behaves like that is your LinkedIn. So you don't want to be constantly tuning your LinkedIn for every job opportunity, especially if you're doing what I always recommend is interviewing for multiple jobs at the same time. So if you're talking with 3 different companies in 3 different roles, you don't want to keep shifting your LinkedIn for each one because you don't know when people are looking at it. So your LinkedIn is kind of a composite of your entire history. It still should be very focused and to the point, but resumes are different. Your resume is going to be directly tuned to the opportunity, and you should be using language that speaks to what they're looking for. If they are talking a lot about innovation and creativity, and you'll see this language in a job description, then it's probably not good for you to focus on your operational strengths, right? Or whatever. And that can be a strength of yours and maybe something you're good at. But if they are constantly saying, we're looking for a really innovative person, we need somebody who's really creative, your resume better speak to that. Otherwise, they're going to look at it and say, oh, they seem like they're more operational than creative. They're not innovative. They're not cutting edge. They're an optimizer, right? And so you got to look at that mirror language, which is read what they're asking for, what they're looking for, use language in your resume that sounds like you're the solution to their problem. Everybody who's hiring has a problem. Everybody that has employees has a problem. There's something that those employees solve. And so if you think about it from that perspective, what problem are they trying to solve? Why are they hiring? What's going on in the market? What's going on with the competition? How do you use language in your resume that speaks to that? So they look at that and say, this person is my answer. This person is the solution to all the problems I've been facing with my team. The other thing is to really think about front loading the information. And that is both in terms of the bullets that you put under each job that you've had, so that the most impactful, most important thing is at the top. It's also in the bullet itself. Human beings, I don't want to say they're lazy, they're efficient. Let's say they're efficient. There's been research that looks at scanning of search pages, which is what I used to do when I was at Yahoo. Same thing applies to resumes and written documents. People scan and give most of their attention to the top left, and they kind of look across, and they very quickly fatigue, and they start scanning for keywords. And you can see this literally with eye tracking research, that they're jumping between specific words that map to their mind of what they're looking for. Creative, innovation, conversion rates, whatever. So they're scanning very quickly. So you want to make sure the most impactful stuff is up and to the left so that they see it first. Because what's unfortunate is if they're reading the resume and they read that first job description or whatever you did, right, and it sounds ho-hum or not a match, they may not even get to the bottom. They might be, oh, that's not a fit. They're being very efficient, and they're going to put it in a stack of no, not a fit. Also, making sure that you're speaking about what you did, not just like a job description, right? I see this all the time where people describe the tasks of their job. Like, I designed e-commerce flows. I wrote specifications. Well, so did everybody. Every single person who is in that role, that type of role, that profession does that. And so by stating the obvious, you're never going to stand out. You're never going to get noticed. And so you always should be thinking about, well, what are the wins that I've had? What are the quantitative wins as much as possible? What are my accomplishments? What did I do? Not so much the task or the activity, but what was the outcome? And so the right kind of language is, I designed something that drove a 20% increase in conversion. My marketing materials contributed to a $30 million campaign. And so you want to use numbers, you want to use revenue numbers so that they're seeing the impact you've had with your job. How did you make your employer's life better? And what was the outcome for what you did? Sometimes you have that information, sometimes you don't. And I talked with someone who said, I worked on all these projects. I know they were really successful. I don't remember the metrics. And I said, you know who probably does, because they care, and I bet it's on their resume? Your product manager, the person that you worked with on that project. And they said, really? And I said, why don't you reach out and just say, hey, remember that project we worked on? It was like 5 years ago. Do you still have that data? Do you talk about that in your wins? And they did. And they did. And they said, yep, here are the revenue numbers. Here's the increase in conversion. Here's all that stuff. It's in my resume. You should put it in your resume too. And they're like, but I was just the designer. And I get so tired of people not taking credit for their work. So this is another thing. Some people are very aggressive, and rightfully so, with their contributions. When they drove value for a product or a business or whatever, they will say, I did this, which led to this revenue. I wasn't the only person. I'm on a team, obviously, but that was the outcome. And I was a part of that. And I tell everybody who either they've done the design or they've done the research or they've done the marketing or the sales or whatever, claim those numbers too. Be clear about what you did. Be clear there was a team. You're not an army of one, but you claim it too. And so if you can get that information, that's fantastic. And if not, you can be qualitative. Sometimes you can say we had a dramatic increase in conversion. Our customer retention improved incredibly that quarter, or whatever. You can find some way to talk about it, but now you're talking about outcomes, not about I did X, Y, Z, and then I did A, B, C. You don't want to talk about it that way. Next question. So that's enough about resumes. What are some strategies to network more effectively with professionals at my level or higher? And what are some ways to maintain those relationships long-term? So this really gets to the heart of what I was talking about earlier, which is about the networking, which I think is so important. The thing that's tricky with networking is it's tempting, and I've seen people do this because they've asked me for it, to go straight to the top. And so I had some folks that, because of my network, and I've been lucky, when you're in the industry this long, and I've been doing this stuff overall like 30 years, a lot of the kids that I grew up with in the industry are now CEOs, they're vice presidents, they're investors. And so people will see that connection. They'll say, can you introduce me to the CEO of LinkedIn? It's like, I could, but I'm not. I'm not going to do that because I don't know who you are. And the thing that is kind of the true of your network is it's your most valuable asset. And you don't just squander that. You don't know this person. And you're not going to introduce somebody that you don't know, some random stranger, to one of the most valuable people in your network, the CEO of a major company. It's not going to happen. So what people need to understand, and this is true in every profession, every industry, every kind of networking, it's true for the entertainment industry. It's like you work the ladder. It's too hard to connect meaningfully with people that are way ahead in their careers, right? Because they're trying to connect. So the CEOs are trying to connect with other CEOs and board members. And they're even thinking about, should I become governor of the state, which actually happens, Meg Whitman. So they're connecting laterally and higher. The last thing they're going to do is spend a ton of their energy and networking capital connecting with someone way down the ladder. It's not going to happen. There are rare cases where people do mentor, but that's very few, right? If you think about it, CEOs, thousands of people are trying to connect with them. Can they mentor thousands of people? No. They're going to mentor a handful, and maybe you can build a relationship with somebody who wants to mentor you. But much more effective is to think about who are the people that are a little bit above me aspirationally, right? They have more years in their career. They seem to have greater success. They're operating at a level slightly above mine. I see them active online. I see them on the conference circuit. I see them all the time. Reaching out and connecting with those people. So you want to identify these people. And I tell people, create a spreadsheet. I mean, this should be something that you are strategically doing, just like you would do to run a business. This isn't something you shoot from the hip with. If you want to have a great career and one that you love, it takes some work and planning. It takes some strategy. And so identify people that you want to connect with that are notable in your industry, notable in your profession, and follow them. Follow them on LinkedIn, follow them on Twitter, see what they're doing. Pay attention to how they're engaging. Where are they networking? How are they interacting? Where are they most active? How can you become part of that conversation? So it's kind of useless to want to connect with somebody and then go to Twitter and they don't spend any time there. So you're not going to connect with that person on Twitter if they don't engage on Twitter, right? So you got to figure out where they are and how to become part of that conversation. And part of that, as some of the folks on this call have seen, when you engage meaningfully and intelligently in people's posts and conversations online, you stand out. It's not going to happen the very first time. It's going to happen with consistency. So if you book some time on your calendar and say, at least once a week, I'm going to spend 30 minutes. I'm going to go on LinkedIn and I'm going to go see what these people have posted. I'm going to engage. I'm going to read it. I'm actually going to click and read the article they shared or what they wrote. And I'm going to say something intelligent. Like, I really like the point you made with this. And I tell people this story, like, there is an author that I admire who, believe it or not, she's on LinkedIn. She's very active on social media. And I loved her book, read her book. And I reached out and I said something in the connection request. And I said, this part of your book where you talked about XYZ really resonated with me because that was my experience with whatever. And so I put something real, I put something meaningful, and I thanked her. I said, thank you for writing this. I don't feel so alone now. She accepted my connection request. And she actually responds to stuff I comment and post now, which for me is a huge fanboy moment. It's like, wow, this is incredible. Wouldn't have happened if I just dumped a connection request with nothing, right? Wouldn't have happened if I hadn't been commenting intelligently and liking stuff that she shares. So that is a key way to build a relationship. And then it's incredibly important to try to find a way to offer value if you expect to receive value. So there is this reciprocity that people expect. And Adam Grant has an excellent TED talk on this if you haven't seen it. And it's all about givers and takers. And it talks about givers and takers and people who try to maximize. and who gets ahead in the professional world, and what does it mean to be a giver and a taker. And so it's important to think about, how could I offer something of value to this person? And it can be something as simple as, you touched my life, right? I can tell you, as a writer, I write a lot, and it often feels like you're just putting stuff into the void, right? And I see numbers that show me people are reading and viewing, but people are shy and people don't engage. And so you're like, is this resonating? Is it helping anyone? Do people care? And so as an author, for example, to hear that you touched someone's life and that it mattered, that means a lot to you. And so you have to think about this person. What is it that they're seeking? What do they need? Is there something that you can offer them that they could learn that maybe they didn't know? Is there some way you can help them? And being helpful online is through engagement and resharing. Everybody's trying to grow their audience. Everybody's trying to get more reach. The platforms punish us like crazy. They want us to spend money. And so even some of the larger, unless they're mega accounts that have millions and millions of followers, the fact that you comment, like, and reshare their material and say something intelligent when you do so is noticed, and it means a lot. I go out of my way to thank everyone who shares my stuff. And there may be a time when there's too much of it for me to do that, but I try every single time to thank someone, because it means a lot. For them to reshare my stuff on Twitter or LinkedIn means a lot to me, and I appreciate it. And so I try to thank every single person every single time. And so when you do this stuff, this social reciprocity kicks in, and that's how relationships are built. You're not just trying to use somebody. You're helping them. They're going to help you. You're going to build a relationship. And people have done that. They've built friendships through these engagements. Some of the people that I've developed friendships with and have strong friendships with from the last 6-7 years are people I met through platforms that we just started having an intelligent dialogue about stuff. The other thing I was going to say is, don't underestimate the power of meeting people in person. So we're not, there are different opinions about how post-pandemic we are now. The vaccine penetration and how many people are immune at this point, but things are opening up again. There are meetups that are happening in person again. There are conferences that are happening in person again. And whether we like it or not, I love online stuff. I'm a huge advocate, as you know. I'm a huge remote work advocate. There is still something different about meeting people in person. There is still something different about going to a conference, having lunch with people, having drinks with people, sitting at the after conference mixer. I built some incredibly deep relationships that have lasted to this day with some pretty great people through conferences and things like that. So think about where these people are that are on your target list, and where are they speaking? Where are they teaching workshops? Where are they going to meetups? And they do, people do. It's kind of incredible to look at some of the people that you would not think would do these things, but they like the social aspect of it. So go meet people, bond over drinks and food. It is a human experience. I always did this with my teams. I had a team when I was at Yahoo that was spread all over the world. It was over 100 people. And everything changed when I would travel, spend time in their office, and we would go out for lunch and we'd go out to dinner and we'd have drinks. The relationship completely transformed. It just did. It's whether we like it or not, we're human beings, and this is how we bond, and this is how we get to know each other. Even better than attending a conference or a workshop is to be the person giving the talk. So I've talked about this before. I know it's scary for a lot of people. Some of you do give talks. Some of you have taught workshops. You can send proposals. They're always looking for people to give talks. There are so many conferences that go on every month, an incredible number of conferences from small to large. There are meetups. They want people to speak. I spoke at a local business mixer and taught local business owners about marketing online. It was fun. Crazy effective for networking. Changes everything. So if you're a little bit shy, a little bit introverted, and I'm an introvert. I don't naturally do this. It's not natural for me to go to a cocktail party and talk to everybody. I'm not a social butterfly. And when I go to the conference things, I find it hard to. I find it hard to break into a group and a circle where there's an extrovert talking and getting all the attention and telling jokes. It's not easy for me. So instead, what I try to do to make it better for my time investment is to speak. And so speaking at an event, being the person on stage that 200 people are looking at is a way more powerful networking activity than trying to work the room later, especially if you're not good at it. And so like when I spoke at a conference in Australia pre-COVID, it was incredible. Like I spoke, I did the talk, and it was like for an hour, and then we had lunch afterwards, and I was swarmed. Like people came up and talked to me. So my introverted self didn't have to worry about going to try start conversations. They came up to me, and people were handing me their business cards, and people wanted to follow up, and people followed me on Twitter because I could put on my slide, you want to follow me and talk more about this stuff, here's my Twitter. Now 200 people in the room can follow me on Twitter instead of doing it one-to-one and trying to work the room later. So my results were always 10x better when I was the one giving the talk, when I was the one teaching the workshop, whatever it might be. And you can look for this stuff online. The smaller stuff is through meetup.com, Eventbrite, but there's conference sites too. It depends on your profession where the stuff is listed. So that's all about maintaining those relationships. Oh, and then touching base. I talk about the fact you got to refresh these relationships. You can't let them go stale. It does take some investment to keep people in your network and to keep talking with people. So there was a good question that somebody sent in, which is we've all dealt with: how to adjust to a new controlling boss. Isn't that fun? So there are bosses who are way more controlling than other bosses. Some of them, I think it's kind of their permanent state. They're just not a good boss. They're not a good manager. They're a micromanager, they're controlling, they're probably never going to change. And so there are some that are like that. For others, I think it's kind of a transitional state. So I think you'll see this happen in cases where it is a new boss, where they don't really know the company yet, they don't know the team yet, and they're worried about failing. You'll see it happen when something goes wrong. So we've all seen it where the team dropped the ball or something went horribly wrong, and now they're getting pressure from above, and now they feel like I've got to jump in and get my fingers dirty. I've got to make sure that everything's perfect the next time we go to the executives with that presentation. That was bad. And so they, for a temporary period of time, become controlling because, again, they're fearful, they're worried. And so the first thing to do is to start with a little bit of research. So it's asking some questions of this boss, it's observing their behavior, how they behave in meetings, and especially how they're behaving with other people. So are they just being controlling with you, or are they being controlling with everybody? Right? And how are they being controlling? Is it controlling how you do the work? Is it controlling how often you check in? Is it they want a lot of reviews? What is it that they're doing, right? So when you start to understand what's really going on, you can get past that and think about, well, what's driving this? Why are they being controlling? What are they worried about? What is the fear? Is it one or the other? Is it quality, the quality of the work? Is it reliability? They're worried about people dropping the ball. Is it time pressure? They want to make sure stuff is getting done on time without knowing that the more they harass you, the less likely it's going to get done on time. Is it visibility into the process? So the whole black box model makes them nervous. You will see this with bosses who aren't familiar with your craft or your profession. So I've had this happen with, wasn't fun, being a design leader and reporting to an engineering boss who didn't really understand design. And so because they didn't understand design and they didn't understand how long things took, and they became very controlling. I want lots of check-ins. I want to see everything. It's like, trust me, this process works, right? Is it legal stuff, right? Are they worried about the company being sued? Whatever. So try to figure out why, because then that helps you understand, well, what do I need to demonstrate so they can back off a little bit, right? Because in the best case, you're going to build trust. You're going to show them that you know how to do the work. You're going to validate that. You're going to show you can do quality work, that you can do stuff on time, that you can manage your own self. You don't have to worry about them checking in and telling you what to do. And then when you do that, I think it's kind of important to reinforce. So this is a bit of a positive reinforcement thing. I talk about managing the manager, and it is, in some cases, it's a positive reinforcement thing. Like when they do things you really appreciate, let them know so they can do more of that. And so when it goes well, you could say, I hope you notice the quality of my work it's what you expected. I hope you notice I've been delivering on time. Is there anything else you'd like to see? Are you feeling good about stuff? And so you're just trying to have kind of an adult conversation to say, is this more of what you want? Is everything okay? And just kind of reassuring them so their stress level can come down, their anxiety can come down, and they can back off with being controlling. The other thing, which is a good strategy, and I've done this with controlling bosses, is to somewhat over communicate. So to say, I want to give you an update, let's figure out the frequency. Is it every day or once a week, whatever, where I'm going to do the usual of, here's what I was working on and completed. Here's what I'm working on next. They're still in process. Here's stuff where I could use some help. There's an escalation. I need you to help with this, whatever it might be. And so doing that in a very short and succinct message or an email every week, that helped a lot with some of these bosses. They kind of breathe a sigh of relief, like, okay, things are on track. I see there's progress. You're calling out issues so I can deal with them. That's fantastic. And then as a nice side effect, you can compile all this later to be something that's used for your own review, your personal review. We often lose track of stuff that we work on. And I do recommend for people, don't wait until the end of 52 weeks to try to write your annual review of like, what did I do this year? So if you do this and you have them all, dump them in a folder, you could actually go in and harvest it and say, okay, here's everything I did. Here's the stuff that I was working on. Here were some of the achievements, some of the wins. You should be documenting stuff like that too. And then what you can then do, if it's still not getting to where you need it to be, is have a conversation about compromise, saying, I think I've shown that I can deliver quality on time. I think I've shown that we're meeting the deadlines. Work's getting done. I think you're happy with it. It's like, maybe we could dial this back a little bit. Maybe I could check in once a week instead of every day, right? Or I think you've seen the way I do things is effective. So maybe I can do it my way instead of doing it, how you were suggesting I do it. Because if it continues, you're going to want to figure out how to negotiate and get a compromise. Otherwise, it's unsustainable. You're not going to tolerate it. You're going to burn out. And sometimes people leave companies because of that. So another question I received, which is similar to the networking one, what are some ways I can approach former colleagues? So this one's kind of fun. As part of my kind of group coaching, and so the folks on my Career Accelerator and the ones who get my premium newsletter familiar with this. So I have themes every month throughout the year. And one of the themes during one of the months that's going to be later this year is about networking. And every week I have an exercise or a challenge or whatever you want to call it that helps work towards that theme. So there will be a challenge every week about networking. One of the challenges, quote, exercises, whatever you want to call it, is refreshing and reactivating your network. So you can go into your network on LinkedIn, you can export it. So you can export all your connections. You can do the same thing with Twitter and other places like that, and create kind of your own relationship management tool. Put it into a CSV, it exports as a CSV, put it into a spreadsheet. And you could go through and say, of all these hundreds or even sometimes thousands of people, who do I really want to build a deeper relationship with, right? For one reason or another. It's not going to be everybody, because you can't. You can't reconnect with thousands of people and keep those relationships fresh. Just like you can't have 150 close friends. You've probably got 5 really close friends, maybe one really good buddy. Can't have 150 close friends. And this, likewise, with your network, you can't refresh and build tight relationships with hundreds of people. So go through and be clear and prioritize it. Like, who do I want to keep fresh in my network? And that could be because of personal reasons. I really like this person. They're just a friend. It's a good friend. It could be because this is somebody I'd love to work with again, whether we're colleagues or I hire them or they hire me, whatever. I liked working with them. This is somebody that I think is a fantastic leader. Wherever they go, I'd like to go. If they ever leave that company, because I don't want to work for that company, but if they leave and go to another company, I'm going to ping them. I'm going to say, hey, are you building a new team at this company? I really enjoyed working with you. I'd love to do that again. And so once you have that, then you can say, well, how do I reach out to these people? This is refreshing that thing. So there are various lightweight ways you can do that. One is if you know people, you know their profession, you know what they care about, and this is from watching what they're doing online, you may come across an article or new research or something that you say, you know what, Susan would really like that. That's kind of cool. I did this with somebody recently. It's like it came through so fresh, they hadn't seen it yet. So I was able to forward it on and say, "Oh, did you see this? I thought you might find this interesting." They're like, "No way." And they're like, "Yeah, thanks for sending that." That's a very lightweight way to engage and give value to somebody. It's like, is there something I can share with you? Interesting news article, a book, whatever, a cool video that you came across, something that might be of use or interest to them or value to them. The other thing I tell people, which is kind of fun, and I've had people do this with me and I've done it with them, is to reach out about a shared memory. And so just say, and I had a friend do this with me recently. She goes, "Do you remember that client we worked with? It was such a pain in the butt. It's like, do you remember when we used to go into their office and they did X, Y, Z? I was just thinking about that the other day, maybe think of you. And I just want to see how you're doing. I haven't talked to you in a couple of years, and like, what are you up to?" And so she did it. I do it with people too, where I reach out and say, "Hey, do you remember that time when we were doing XYZ at the company and whoever it was came in and took over the org?" And it's like, what a nightmare that was. It made me think of you. I was just wondering what you're up to. How you doing? So that could be it's nice to have somebody say, "I was thinking about you." And it's genuine, right? You're not just making it up. You're like, "I really was thinking about you. And I just wanted to see how you're doing." That's it. It's not the cheesy Facebook push a button, "Happy birthday." It's like, I hate that so much. It's like, reach out with a real memory that you guys shared and say that. And I'll give another one that I think is amazing. It's practicing some gratitude. So I know it's kind of touchy feely, but gratitude works, and reflecting on why you're grateful for things really does help your emotional well-being and mental well-being. Really helps other people too. So reaching out to people that did something kind for you, that helped you, that made a difference in your life, whether that is a friend or a professor or an old boss or a colleague, and saying, "I don't think I ever thanked you for that." Because we often don't. We're kind of busy. And in the moment, it feels kind of weird. And sometimes it feels awkward to thank somebody in the moment, especially when there's a power dynamic, right? So I did this, because later, as I became more confident and older, and it's like, whatever, I reached out to professors, because at the time I was a student. I'm like, "Hey, professor." I didn't want to see like I was kissing up either, because it was kind of like I was still in school. Same thing with bosses. It felt kind of weird. It's like, I don't want you to think that I'm kissing up and trying to get you to promote me or give me a raise. So it was years later. And I reached out to a professor and I said, "I don't think I ever told you how much your work meant to me, what you taught. You were one of the best professors I ever had. And I remember this thing you said." And he did. He's the one who initially taught me the whole concept of learn how to learn how to teach yourself. He said, "I can't teach you everything you're going to have to know in life or even about psychology." He said, "So if you don't learn how to learn, your career's not going to go very far. So what I'm going to teach you is how to do that." And he spent a lot of time showing us how to teach ourselves and how to learn. And that stuck with me for life. And so I told him. I actually told him, and I actually was on campus 25 years later, and I wrote a note and slipped it under his door. He was still there. And I said, "Hey, you made a difference in my life." Wow. I mean, can you imagine receiving something like that? It's just like, cool, man. It's unbelievable. And I did with an old boss at IBM, where I just said, "You were my first real boss." And it was 20 years later. And I said, "I just want to let you know I appreciated how kind you were and how much you mentored me and coached me." And I said, "It made a huge difference. That's why I stayed in tech for 20 years, because I was impressed with what the work you did and how you managed people. And I took a lot of that with me. And that's how I managed my team too. His open door policy, his policy of nothing's wrong. We'll solve it together. I'm not going to yell at you or get upset." Right. Um, yeah. Yeah. Yes, that is a very big challenge. That's a tough one. This is one of those things. This is a good question. I don't know if you guys see it in the chat, but the social psychological component of unfairness, that it's valid when a new boss makes half of what you're making. So your boss makes less money than you do. This is something that if you're coached well and you are kind of given good leadership coaching and training in the company, they teach you this. And they say there's going to come a day, maybe even right away, where there are some people on your team that are going to be making more money than you do, and you can see their salary. So because you're their manager, right? And there are a lot of reasons for that, right? So there's going to be, their tenure in the company, their tenure in the field and their profession, the work that they're doing, the value they deliver. And so it's really, in some ways, the onus is on the manager and the boss to understand that compensation isn't the only ruler by which we're measured. And your role, and this is interesting for leaders to accept too, because many of them don't get this right. It's like, just because you're someone's leader doesn't mean you're superior to them. And this is where it's interesting. You both play a very different role. You are, in some ways, it's a partnership. And there is a difference in the power dynamic, of course. But there is a partnership where you're blocking and tackling and dealing with issues that you don't want your employees to have to even deal with or mess with. And I would do that for my team. And I'd say that it's like, I'm going to go deal with the resources, the budget, whatever they needed. And I said, I want you to focus on what you're doing. Just keep working on the product. I'm going to go find out why in the hell we don't have our hardware that we requested. Don't waste a minute doing that. That's my job. I want you to focus on that. And so there is this dynamic that's different between what you do as a leader to help your team, and some people call that servant leadership in some cases, and what they're doing. And that doesn't necessarily mean that compensation is mapped to that. So just because you're the leader doesn't mean you make more money than people on your team. It often happens, especially with more junior people, but it isn't necessarily the case with every single person that's going to be on your team. I had some very senior people that made more money than I did, and that's fine. That's the way it is. And a grown-up leader will understand that. Let's see. So this is an interesting one. I know we only have a few more minutes. This was somebody asking, this was somebody that wasn't in the US, because it's a tricky problem. How do I persuade my colleagues to take action on one of my initiatives? So we often get into this case where we need to persuade others that we don't have authority over. And you'll discover this a lot in your career, especially when you work on teams. You'll discover this as you become a leader, where you're partnering with other leaders, but you're not their boss. But you want to persuade them of something, whether it's a project or it's some kind of initiative, or shuffling headcount or resources, whatever it might be. And the thing you have to remember is that people are rarely altruistic in the workplace. There is going to be the occasional person that's going to say, I'm going to do what's right for the team and what's right for the company. And even if I fail, it's going to be okay because I do what's right for the team. Most people won't do that. Most people especially won't help you succeed with an initiative if it means it's risking their success. And that's often the case. So if you're asking somebody to take on more work or to change their priorities or whatever it might be, but they're not getting anything taken off their plate, they're like, okay, now I'm taking on more work, I'm more likely to fail, and I'm being judged on what I already committed to. So if I help you, I'm going to fail, and my boss is either going to fire me or not give me a good review. Something negative is going to happen to me. And so that often happens. And there's only, a couple of ways, I think, to address this. One, which I had talked about with this person, is kind of the carrot and the stick. So in some companies, it is a stick, which works apparently really well in the US, but not in this country that we were talking about. I had a case like this at a company where we were told to do something and to inform other organizations that this is what they would have to do. But we didn't have any authority over those organizations. They're completely lateral to us. And they were like, yeah, no, we're not going to do that. We're busy. We got our own roadmap. We have our own stuff to do. And so we had to report back to the CEO, who had tasked us with this, and said, hey, we're not getting anywhere with this. People are busy. They got a committed roadmap. They're not going to agree to more work if they don't have to. And she said, oh, really? Do they understand that you are acting as my right hand in this case? This is my mandate. And when they say no to you, they're saying no to me. I don't think they understand that. I'm going to make a couple of phone calls. And so she made a few phone calls, and that's a stick, but the CEO can do that. So in some cases, that is what it takes. In some cultures, in some companies, that could work, right? A more effective way that tends to work across the board in almost every culture is the carrot approach, which is, how can I make sure that whatever we're going to agree to is going to be beneficial for you too? I should not be structuring this request or this initiative in a way that it's all me and you get nothing. Or if anything, in some cases, you're punished. You're giving up resources or budget or whatever. And so you have to work on this. I'm going to talk a lot about this actually in my newsletter this week. So if you subscribe to my Invincible Career newsletter, if you go to newsletter.invinciblecareer.com, I'm going to publish something about this week, which I think is important, which is how to get true collaboration when you're working with people and to create things that are win-win structures. And it requires a mindset shift, and it requires you to think very differently about how you get things done. And it takes more work. It is when you're a younger leader and you're kind of new to this and you're in a hurry and you're full of stress and anxiety and time pressure, you just try to push stuff through. And I encountered this a lot in my career. I did some of it myself, regretfully, where it's just like, you just need to do it because I'm saying so. And it's kind of a lazy way to do it because you're feeling time crunch. It takes more work and more effort to say, how can I change what I'm doing so that this is beneficial for you too? And I call that sitting on the same side of the table. And so, and I think it was Jason Calacanis who I initially heard this from. I got to look up the reference. But he said, we mostly get into confrontational discussions with people where we're across the table. And that happened in the workplace when we physically were in the workplace. And you'd see it, especially if it was a contentious meeting. You would go into the meeting and you would sit on the other side of the table to face the person, to debate and to argue and try to persuade. In some cases, people tried to bully. I never saw in the workplace people who were having kind of a contentious meeting come and sit next to each other. It's incredibly powerful. And so you can do it kind of metaphorically and virtually too, but it's getting on the same side of the table to say, it's not me versus you. It's us versus this problem. I want us to work together, to collaborate and figure out how can we make this work and be successful for you, because I know you have things that you have to achieve. And for me, I have to achieve what I need to achieve. And can we do this together, without having a mediator or a big boss come in and do it? But can we think of this as a problem that we're collaborating together to solve, to get to a resolution that will make us both happy, versus I need to crush you and win, or you need to crush me and win. It's a very different mentality and a very different way to approach it. Last few minutes. So I wanted to touch on these because it's important. This is a couple different questions. They're related, so I'll just kind of group those together. A lot of people are interviewing for jobs. A lot of people are trying to figure out how to get into a good company, right? You're not interviewing for a job hoping to work for a terrible company. You're not interviewing hoping, I hope I get into a toxic workplace. That'd be fantastic. So you're hoping it's a healthy company. It's a good company culture. It's a great boss. It's going to be good for you. And you're trying to figure out from the outside, is this a good situation? Is this a good manager? Is this a good company? So someone had asked me, it's like, well, what are the questions I can ask in a job interview to make sure that the manager is a good one? This is a good manager. What can I ask the interview team and people who would be my future coworkers? Is this a good company? Is this a healthy company culture? And I'm going to start out by saying that's really hard. Not just because you can't ask the perfect question. Maybe you could. But it's a very weird situation where they're trying to put their best foot forward. They're trying to convince you, if they like you, they're trying to persuade you to come join the company. No manager who's a bad manager is going to say, you got me, I'm a bad manager. I'm toxic. I'm terrible. I'm a micromanager. The culture here is horrific. You don't want to come work here. No one does that. They're trying to make a good impression. They're trying to win you over. They're trying to put on kind of their best appearance. So there are questions you can ask to kind of get around it. You can say things like, how are decisions made here? So ask them in a very open-ended way and ask to give, for example, say, can you give me an example of that? So instead of saying, are you toxic? They're like, I'm not toxic. Are you a good manager? I'm a great manager. You're going to say, how do you make decisions? And you're going to listen. And you're going to say, is this a kind of company where I like how those decisions are made? Because sometimes people will be honest about it. They're like, well, this is how it's made. And it's, very much a top down because authority's a lot here. It's not going to be data driven. Other will say, oh, it's data driven. How do they handle pressure and escalations that come from above? So when you get a request from your upper management, how does that get to the team? How do you manage that process? How do you manage escalations from below? Can your team escalate things to you, and how do you handle that? How do you resolve conflict on the team? Can you give me an example? Can you give me an example of a time when you and one of your employees had a difference of opinion about how to do something or the solution for something, and you actually changed your mind. That you said, the employee's right in this case, and you changed your mind. Can you give me an example? Because they might say, oh yeah, I've done that. And this is the whole behavioral question stuff. It's like, well, can you give me an example? Tell me about a time that happened. And if they can't, then they're not being honest, right? So if they're like, oh yeah, I know exactly when that happened, and hopefully it's fresh in their memory because it's an important thing that happens, right? The thing that I'm going to say, and this applies to both, because the other was like, how do I make sure it's a good company, right? It's not a toxic work culture. You're going to pick up on some vibes. You're going to get some red flags. You're going to ask questions. You're going to hear answers like, that's not exactly what I'm looking for. It may not necessarily be bad. It's just not you. This isn't how I like to work. This isn't a culture that's good for me. They're like, we're really competitive. We fight with each other and we love it. And that's Microsoft, right? You're like, I don't like that. It's not good for me. So maybe I'm not a fit. The most important thing you can do is to find people that used to report to that boss. Because the people that currently report to that boss are going to be a little nervous, even in the best case, about saying things that might get back to the boss or saying something negative about the manager. They're certainly not going to do that. People that used to work for them are much more likely to be honest with you. People that used to work at that company are much more likely to tell you the truth about the work culture and what it's really like, who gets promoted, who gets rewarded, how are decisions made, how does the team treat each other. You can find this information so much easier than the old days. Oh my gosh, you guys have LinkedIn. It's like amazing. You can go and look, where was this manager before this? What is their history? Who was at that company at the same time? You can start to connect the dots. You can talk with your network again. And I've done that where it's like, does anybody know this person? Oh yeah, I used to work with them. Can we have a call? Because they're not going to tell you, if they're smart, with a paper trail through email and stuff like, oh, they're horrible, worst manager ever. They'll have a phone call, Zoom, but you will get more of the truth from people that used to work there, used to work for that person. And so it takes a little bit of digging. Go on LinkedIn, find people that used to be there, find people that used to be work for that company. I would do that. And I say, hey, I noticed you were at this company at the same time this other person. I'm interviewing with her. Could you tell me a little bit more about her management style? What does she appreciate? How do you communicate with her? What was it like working for her? You don't come out and say, are they terrible? You're basically trying to find out, what was it like to work for this person? And you're going to either hear, they're amazing. And I've done that. It's like, this is the best boss I ever worked for. You're lucky to go work for that person. They really took care of me. They take care of the team. Fantastic. I'd love to work for them again, which would be fantastic. You might hear, don't make that mistake. It's like, I know they look good on paper. Not a good person to work for, and they'll be honest and say, I don't want you to get into that. Most people are nice and they want to look out for each other. You might get the middle, which is kind of damning with faint praise, which is like, yeah, they're okay. Yeah, it was all right. We got along okay. That's not good either. So there are people who are afraid. They don't want to say something bad about anybody, and they're still afraid because they don't really know you to say something negative. So if they're not like effusive and they're not like, this person's great, they're kind of like, yeah, it was okay. Yeah, they're all right. Good leader. Sure. Then you kind of got your answer. And so you'll know. So that I think is the best way to get the straight information about, is this a good person to work for? Is this a good company to join? So I know we're out of time. Oh, wow. That was a lot of talking. Sorry, guys. I answered a lot of questions for you. I hope that was helpful. I'm going to be trying to do these every month. Like I said, if you found this useful, I engage with people quite a bit, as the folks here will tell you, on social media, in my newsletter. If you ask questions in the comments, I will answer you. So if you want to follow up and get more of this advice, go to newsletter.invinciblecareer.com. From there, you can find everything. You can find out about the community that some of you are in. You can find out about coaching. You can find out about my newsletter. And I'll do my best to answer your questions, and I'll continue to do this. But thank you all for joining. Really appreciate it. And wherever you are, enjoy the rest of your evening. Take care, folks. Bye.